Speaking today is Brent Miller. He's the executive director of Northwest River Partners, which is an advocacy group for hydroelectric power in the Northwest. He's a native of Fairview, Oregon, and Willamette University, and he's going to talk to us today about the wonders of letting water make lights come on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today. Can I just do a time check? I have how much time, including Q&A?
About a half hour.
About a half hour. Okay, great. So I'm trying to honor that because I love to talk about how on and on and on. And so anyway, it is a great honor to be here today. I really do appreciate it. I always am honored by any group who's willing to listen. And also, I am willing to take questions along the way. And you have a lot of information to cover, but at the same time, it's always fun if it's a dialogue. I'm here today to talk about a little bit about dams. They are controversial, as there are some groups that would like to see them gone. We advocate for them to remain, and still purpose that they're fulfilling. And I'll talk about why we think that's important. But I do want to acknowledge there are different perspectives on this. And you know, I've been to some Rotary Club meetings. I understand that you believe in kind of uplifting, honest dialogue that is kind of good for everyone. So I just want to share that it's okay if people disagree with me. I'm totally comfortable with that, and I'm like really used to it. So, so anyway, please do feel free to chime in and to disagree. You know, and I'm definitely do my best to share our perspective on the issue. I also saw that Amy Eccles is on today. Who works for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and I've worked with Amy before. Although I was hoping I was going to get to meet her in person, but it will remain a virtual relationship for today. So, but anyway, so let's see moving forward. And I was warned that this does take a beat. So, Northwest River Partners, our mission is to lead the charge for the Northwest to realize clean energy potential with hydroelectricity as a cornerstone. And that makes a lot of sense if you understand how much of our region's electricity comes from hydropower. And I'll get into that a little bit, but in Washington State, where I live in Vancouver, 2/3 of our electricity comes from hydropower. In Oregon, it's about 40%. So as we look at our clean energy future, hydropower is a huge component of that. We, as an organization, represent about 100 member organizations. We're not for profit. And most of our member organizations are not-for-profit community-owned electric utilities across the greater Pacific Northwest region. So moving forward and remembering to aim the clicker this way. Okay, good. So about Northwest Energy. The Northwest, as I'm referring to or alluding to, produces the majority or almost the majority of the entire nation's hydropower. We produce 40% of the entire USA's hydropower resources. And the most of that is actually coming from Oregon. Because we have rain. So that is part of that issue. The other thing that we have, and I'll go back when I get forward a little too fast, because of our abundant hydroelectric resources, we also have the least or the lowest energy burdens of any region in the entire United States. And so energy burden is essentially the percentage of a low-income household, the percentage of their income that comes or that has to go to energy costs. So anything that is 6% or greater, 6% or more of your gross monthly income goes to pay for energy, then you're considered energy burden. And both Oregon and Washington, even with our very affordable hydropower, about 25% of Oregonians and Washingtonians qualify as energy burden. So that's a big issue. So next, moving forward, we also have the least carbon intensive grid in the entire United States. This graphic comes from the Bonneville Power Administration, and actually we love it because it's kind of cute. But so you can see in terms of carbon intensity where the nation gets its electricity from. The nation has a fairly big carbon footprint. The Northwest itself has a much smaller one. And then you can't even see, maybe people on Zoom can see, but there's a little tiny baby footprint down at the bottom where that arrow points to, and that represents the carbon footprint from the volatile power administration, where most of my own members get their electricity from. So the hydropower resource is really important when we think about climate change and fighting climate. As a result of all this, we are number one. So be proud of yourself. The Blazers may not be good this year, but our energy grid is good. Oregon was ranked this last year as having the best energy infrastructure in the entire nation. But you'll notice it's not just Oregon. 4 of the top 5 states in the United States are from the Pacific Northwest. And that is because of our hydropower resources. Essentially, this is rated on energy affordability, energy cleanness, and energy reliability. So again, hydropower is a really important part of that, and it's showing up in the rankings. I didn't mean to dig at the replacements, by the way. I'm rooting for them to come down. So anyway, in terms of our clean energy future, this is a really important issue. And one of the things, and I was talking to Jeff, and we had a pretty good discussion before this, is that there are tensions out there, right? And when I say tensions, is like if you look at one of these gears, let's say you want to reduce pollution. Well, that is great, but the thing is, all these gears are connected. They're all related to energy. And one way, that's one reason I really love my job, is because like when you talk about energy policy, it touches everything. It touches the environment, it touches social justice, touches climate. I mean, there's so many things. But one of the things, and I worked really hard on this, but one of the things you'll see is that when one gear moves one way, other gears move other ways. And that is the challenge of coming up with a holistic and meaningful energy policy, is that these things can be at odds with each other. And an example I'll use is like, okay, we're getting rid of coal resources and natural gas resources. That is great for reducing pollution, but it's bad for maintaining a reliable grid. There's a tension, and that's kind of the punchline of my whole talk today. So, you can only. But anyway, let's talk about where clean energy is going. So these states in the Western United States have all announced really aggressive clean energy goals to be essentially electric that is carbon free by 2050. The latest, Oregon is by 2040. Washington State is by 2045. Who knows how Oregon chose 2040? In the room. They wanted to be 5 years better than Washington. That is, I promise you, all the thought that went into that. Because I know the people who were involved in that. But yeah, why not? There's what's wrong with having a little rivalry, right? But in any case, these are really aggressive goals, and you can see why these goals are so aggressive in this next slide. Is that, as I mentioned, hydropower represents about half of our total energy pie in the Northwest. But we are talking about, when we get rid of all natural gas and coal-fired generation, getting rid of about 1/3. So we still, in this region, have a significant amount of fossil fuel generation. And we're talking about getting rid of that. And we're talking about doing it at the same time that we are trying to electrify transportation. And that means put more demand on the electric grid and electrify home heating. Again, putting more demand on the grid. So you're essentially taking away generation at the same time that you're potentially doubling the amount of electricity that would be used by the time we get to 2050. And so one of the big challenges here is, we're not building any more hydropower except maybe pump storage hydro. And my understanding is that you had someone from Rye Development here talking about some of their pump storage hydro facilities. They are North member, which is great. But most of the new generation that's going to come online is going to be wind and solar power. And this is a challenge. And again, and this is not me beating up on wind and solar power. They're an integral part of where we're going. But one of the challenges that we see is that wind power is an example, and this comes from Volatile Power Administration and actual generation in their service territory this last year. And what you can see is something really that happens fairly frequently. And that is when the temperature goes up, so you can see a lot of the top, these are the temperatures in Portland, around 81, 81, then all of a sudden jumping to 95, 100 over this 1 week in the last year. You can see what happens to the wind generation. It essentially ends up going to zero. And why that happens anytime you get a heat wave or a period of extreme cold in the region because you lose your pressure differentials. And wind requires pressure differentials. So if you have a heat wave that settles across the entire region or a cold snap, you end up getting very little production. And that is a real problem because we all want electricity when we want it. And candidly, we want it when it's hot. We want it when it's cold. That's when we want it the most. And so there's a challenge that wind power and to a certain extent solar power can have. Solar power challenges are different. It has more to do with sunset that comes around every day. And so at the end of the day, when it can be kind of the hottest part of the day, solar panels can kind of ramp down. So the Western Electricity Coordinating Council, they're responsible for grid reliability in the West. They've identified something that I think really encapsulates this challenge, and it's that both demand and resource variability are increasing. So you have to understand what they're saying here. Yeah, because of climate change, we're getting more extreme temperature, which means the demand on the grid is getting more variable. It's less predictable. But also at the same time, because we're getting rid of polluting fossil fuels on the grid, that is also making our supply more variable. So those two things taken together represent, again, one of those tensions we were talking about. There is tremendous tension between these clean energy goals and maintaining a reliable grid. And then this is another quote from them and basically what they were just saying here in the second quote is that even if all planned resources are built, that we may see an unacceptable high risk of blackouts across the entire Western United States as early as 2025. So, and they're not the only agency. Several other reliability organizations across the West have warned about the same thing. And so the one thing I want folks to understand is, you know, my background is from the utility space. I spent 20 years of my career working for Portland General Electric, most of that in power supply. And so the thing that utilities are most worried about is providing a safe, reliable, affordable grid, but safe and reliable at the very top. Like they want to make sure that you have electricity when you need electricity. And there's a lot of states in the past 3 years that have not been able to maintain that. And so we have a list of them there. Now, the good news is we don't care about most of those states, right? I'm just kidding. Please don't tell anybody that. But there are states that have come really close to blackouts that we do care about. And that includes Oregon and Washington State. And so the challenge is here, this is not someone else's problem. This is really a localized problem, and it's getting worse. It's not getting better. So, and again, I'm just kind of sharing with you that, you know, this is an issue that is now starting to capture national attention and national media as we see states across the entire U.S. experience these problems. And again, for us, and I want to really emphasize this for my members, for the groups that we represent, which are primary utilities, this is a kind of a life and death public safety threat. And so for them, it's very near and dear to their hearts. So that's one of the reasons I'm out here talking to you, is because I really want people to understand that before something happens, that we have to pay attention to this, because if we wait till after it happens, we end up in a much worse situation. And so again, this is where hydroelectric really shines, and that is hydroelectric isn't necessarily a substitute for wind and solar. We already have a huge amount of hydroelectricity here. And we're not really advocating for building new dams. Most of the good places, you know, to build dams have been taken, you know, because the Northwest has a lot of hydroelectric dams. We are supportive of the new pump storage projects that are popping up across the region. We think that's a great answer. They kind of serve as a battery. But the power is going to really shine in the clean energy future is its ability to complement wind and solar power. So I shared with you that challenge of both wind and solar power being intermittent. They're not always available. The beauty of the hydropower system is its ability to store water. So you end up with a dam, and then when you put the dam in the river, you can raise that water level, and that water behind the dam essentially acts as a clean energy battery, a giant clean energy battery. And then when you choose to release the water past the turbine, it pushes the turbine blade and it lights up the city. And I don't know if you guys saw that, but I actually made the city light up. But then like, I didn't do the tech department. This is all me. So, but anyway, the great thing about the hydropower resource is that you can do that again and again and again. Is you can store and release that water, store and release it. That is what you need, whether it's hydropower or some other resource. I guarantee you that you can only maintain a reliable grid if you have these resources. We call them peaking resources or on-demand resources that can fill in those gaps. But yes, go for it.
Do you know anything about the resource of CO2 that you convert from the air?
No, I know that. So I know folks are looking at carbon capture.
Yeah.
So carbon capture is really exciting. It's not every again for all energy issues are controversial because people have different views on them. But CO2 capture would allow you to continue to operate natural gas power plants or maybe even coal power plants, but capture their CO2 export and maybe even turn them into some sort of fuel. So that the technology is fairly nascent and it's very expensive. And so there are some questions about its viability that some people are worried about. Well, what are you going to do with that CO2 once you capture it? Because some ideas are to like kind of drill deep into the ground and store it in caverns or things like that. But so there's some questions about that. But it is one of the things that people are looking at to make sure that we have those kind of resources. Yes, go for it.
Video I saw, they were converting it to fuel.
Okay. Yeah, no.
And I'm thinking California is a perfect place to do that
Yeah.
because they use so much of our water and so much of the electricity and they emit so much carbon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that as long as, one of the issues is a lot of groups don't like that because they want us to move away from using anything for fuel other than electricity. You know what I'm trying to say? And, but I think that it's something that's a viable option. The other place that we, I think, have some opportunity for is in small modular nuclear reactors. So they are much safer than kind of their older, much larger brethren. They hold the promise of being much more cost effective because they can be built off site and then moved in instead of being 1,200 megawatts, which is, the kind of the current size of a large nuclear power plant that makes like 300 megawatts. So kind of more affordable for utilities to get involved with. But there has to be something, whether it's carbon capture or green hydrogen or nuclear power. We're going to have some more resources that can do what hydropower can do to fill in these gaps. So yeah, great question. Thank you. Also many of our Northwest dams have excellent fish passage. I didn't have time to do a fish ladder, so I had to fish up over the dam. That's not exactly how it works. But anyway, so talking about the Lower Snake River dams, they are a really important part of the region's energy future. They represent about 7% of the region, 11% of the region's electricity. And I believe that's the right number. And actually, I think I believe they represent about 11% of the Vulnerable Power Administration's total electricity. So so they are important, but the real importance is not the average energy, but getting rid of them ends up causing a challenge in terms of we lose much more in terms of their ability to meet on-demand power. So 3,000 megawatts of peaking capacity, that's what these dams can provide. That's about as much as 3 large nuclear power plants. Many of you know about the Boardman coal plant that was retired, I think in 2020. That plant, which was a large plant, only could produce 500 megawatts, 550 megawatts. So we're talking about the ability to produce about 6 times as much energy, but on a carbon-free basis. So it's a really big deal. Losing them loses that capacity to the Northwest. Also, the dams allow barging because they have water elevators called locks that enable barges to move up and downstream. And losing the dams would mean losing about 10% of the nation's wheat export capacity and a lot of irrigated farmland. So they are important. And again, one of the things that we're trying to let people know is like wind and solar are awesome. They are not going to. We're not going to solve them without having these other resources. And one of the things I wanted to share with you is we conducted a study last year, we commissioned one, and basically said to meet the region's clean energy goals, and they're not goals. We have to understand these are laws in the past, they are mandates. So to meet the the greater region's clean energy mandates, we have to build 160 gigawatts of new generating capacity, wind, solar, and batteries. Now, again, that's about 160 nuclear power plants worth of electricity. It's more than doubling the current amount of electricity currently generated in the Western United States. It's a huge number. We're trying to do that in 20 years. It took us about 100 years to build the existing capacity. So it's a huge issue. The thing that our study found, and actually it's been really helpful in talking to policymakers, because I don't think they understand this, is that we are only on course right now, even if we double the amount of generation built in the last decade, to get about halfway there by 2045. Now remember, Oregon's supposed to be all the way there by 2040, Washington by 2045. What our study showed is that at the current, doubling the current pace, we're not going to get there until 2075. So in other words, even though these laws only passed a couple of years ago, we were already 30 years behind, which is like some kind of bizarre time machine. But that is a challenge. It is a huge challenge. So getting rid of the lower secret dams, that's the red line at the top. That ends up, instead of having to build 160, now we have to build 180. And it ends up delaying us by another 5 years. Also, our study found that electricity rates could jump by, it says 25% or more, and it's probably closer to 40% or more, and ends up creating a much greater carbon footprint of about 5 to 9 million metric tons of CO2. So in terms of the clean energy future, it's really important that, we maintain the dams. And then I just wanted to share this. This is not just our study. Nature Conservancy, who I actually recently spoke with some of the folks behind their study, but they did a similar study looking at decarbonizing the West. And what they found is that we will again found that we'll have to more than double the current generating capacity of the entire grid by 2050. And then it will take about 60,000 square miles of land to do so, because wind and solar power kind of disperse resources that they take up a lot of land. So, by the way, the Nature Conservancy study, and it's called Power of Place-West. I encourage you to look at it. It's really well done. And one of the things that they really approach it from a land use, because as you guys know, the history of the Nature Conservancy, they're concerned about habitat, right? So they did a really nice job. Because a lot of groups will do things, but they won't actually do the math. And we're always telling people you have to do the math, and they did the math. So I do encourage you to do it. They're a completely neutral party in terms of our issues. They're not looking at the lowest nuclear dams per se. They're just kind of looking at what it takes to get there. So it's a really good study. And I'm just trying to see how am I doing on time? Okay, so I will conclude. I do want to say something about salmon, because salmon are a really huge issue. And that is that a lot of people think the dams need to be removed because the dams are hurting salmon. And what I'll share with you, and I understand, and there are people who passionately believe that, but I will say this, is that there's scientific consensus that the greatest threat to salmon populations is the warming ocean caused by climate change. Roughly 1% of the salmon that are kind of born in rivers end up making their way back from the ocean. 1%. That is not a sustainable number, right? I mean, we are not going to have sustainable salmon populations. You need at least 2 to make baby salmon. Right. And so we, the goal has to be between 2 and 6%, like we're being told. And so, our position is this, all the lower Snake River dams and even the lower Columbia River dams have outstanding fish capacity. Literally billions of dollars have been invested in them over the past 25 years. Pulling out these dams is not going to improve salmon numbers in our estimation by a considerable amount. But if we do things that harm our ability to fight climate change, like, things that would lower our carbon generation, like dams, that is going to be harmful to salmon, not just in the Snake River, but across the entire west coast of North America. We believe that hydropower is part of that solution to helping salmon, as ironic as that sounds. So anyway, I do want to open up to see if there's any last questions before I conclude. Oh, yes, ma'am.
I was raised by a civil engineer who was in dams and trenches.
Oh, okay, there you go.
So he's just cheering you on. I feel. But what I've become concerned about are these data centers that are
Oh, yes.
water consumers. And I was raised saying that we have to make sure there's jobs for people.
Mhm.
And so I was kind of thrilled when we had the aluminum plant out in Fairview, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of good middle-class jobs out
Yeah,
there that
absolutely.
even went away.
Mhm.
And so I really don't want those dams to go away. And then I know about flooding issues.
Mhm.
And so I, especially with the water, I mean, the weather being so bad, I feel like the dams really provide a lot of flooding control
Mhm.
that we could lose if you take the dams down. So what is your opinion about these data centers that are consuming the water? I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, so as Jeff mentioned in my bio, I grew up in Fairview. I went to school in the Reynolds School District, which was named after the smelter. So I'm maybe the only school district in the country named after a smelter. I don't know, but anyway, the data centers, I mean, they have been a boon to a lot of communities. The tax revenues and things like that have, I know, have helped a lot of communities where they're at. They don't necessarily employ a lot of people themselves. So a little bit unlike the aluminum smelters in the past. They do use a lot of electricity. At the same time, I think they're all trying to get better at that. You identified the real issue though, which is water use. Is I think more than electricity use, the water use is a really big deal. I don't know, that is a little bit outside my wheelhouse, and I think that I think right now for the Northwest, maybe I'll answer it like this, and then that's the best way I can conclude. We've seen major droughts in other areas of the West. So the Northwest is not, even with climate change, we're not anticipating. So the forecasts from the climatologists say that if you're a fan of rain, you're still going to get plenty of rain. So for those of us who are here for that, now there could be variation from year to year, and that there always has been, and there always will be. So in some ways, that's really good news for us in terms of hydropower, and maybe even for water use from the data centers. Is that we should still have plenty of water, but yeah, I think that's something that definitely bears consideration. So yeah, I appreciate it's a really thoughtful question. I don't have a tremendous answer for you, but I think it's worth watching. Thank you. Yes.
So if I remember right, a few years ago, Washington State passed a law about the power generators, that they were to increase their renewable generation, and they discounted water as a renewable.
Right.
Do you have some?
Yes, that's a great question. So initially, under the renewable portfolio standard, hydropower was, but in 2020, I think they passed the Clean Energy Transformation Act, and they moved from renewable energy to clean energy. And under that definition, now hydropower fits.
Okay.
So, and it does in Oregon as well. So, and I don't care if they call it renewable or clean. So it's fine with me. Anyway, I think that we're at time. I would just say that I'm happy to continue the conversation. I did bring some business cards, but also it's really easy to reach me. My email is Kurt, spelled K-U-R-T, at NW. If any of you have any questions or thoughts, please do feel free to reach out. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.